Hello, this is David from DN Cognitive Counseling. Tonight I have a somber question from Jennifer on the last video of the psychology of systemic racism. Jennifer writes, can you please explain to me why people feel rioting, violence, and criminality are acceptable responses to anything? I completely understand what happened to George Floyd is a crime. To that I have no doubt. But Minneapolis has turned into a war zone. The rioters are burning down buildings, for God's sake. Aside from the fact that this is not social distance. I understand that everyone protesting thinks that the officers need to be arrested. I do too. But how does destroying your city, the place where you live and call home, achieve any goal? I don't get it, and it makes me really sad. Jennifer, to your point, I share your feelings of sadness and the horror that has taken place in Minneapolis. The sad part is that so many people present that they know what's going on and really without understanding about people's perception. I'm going to use the example from the Daily Wire because it's relating exactly to what goes on to the last video and what the discussion is. Ben Shapiro, very honestly and straightforward, says, listen, you're absolutely right. This has been a horrific incident. The cop belongs to go to jail. I agree. But doesn't show any form of racism. We don't know if this is a racist act or not. And the reality is, there's no way to actually know if there was or wasn't. But when a people have been feeling a certain way over and over and over again, that in their daily lives they feel that people treat them differently, look at them differently, interact with them differently, always are feeling it's an us against them type of mentality, and this perception increases. Put on top of that the media portrays every act that takes place as a racial one, meaning that any interaction between a white and black person automatically must be racism from the aspect of the media. So that when people look at this, they're not looking at this saying, well, what happened in reality? What was this really? People then have a lot of emotion and anger that's been building over long periods of time. And when you sit and build people's anger up over a long period of time, and then you light a match and throw into one incident, it does explode. The people that are rioting aren't sitting there saying, well, I want to logically decide what we should do about this. They're angry, they're disenfranchised, they feel the system doesn't work for them. What makes it worse, and the reason why I did the last video and spent so much time about it, about the Michael Knowles, it is that mentality that creates this type of riot. It is exactly that mindset that devalues the way that somebody else sees something, that makes a person feel that they are being devalued, that nobody's going to listen to them, that nobody believes them. And what ends up happening is they say, well, what's the point? Why should I rely on the system for? What should I deal with this when all of a sudden nobody's going to believe what I say anyway? Many of the people that I've worked with throughout the years have told me incident after incident of harassment, of different situations. They never report it. No matter how many times I say, make a report, tell people what you're experiencing. And then what happens is you get Ben Shapiro reading, well, there are no reports that show that there's any issue or differences. That's because most of the people who are experiencing this don't report it to begin with. That skews the way that you're going to get statistics and seeing things. But anecdotally, if you talk to the people who have dealt with the systems, dealt with the way they feel, do they feel there's a difference? I have been lucky enough in my practice to come across people who have been in prison, both of different races. They themselves report differences they see in the way that things have been dealt with. when you have those visions and those feelings and nobody is justifying them or nobody's doing anything to deal with them, and then you have people that devalue them, it breeds a lot of anger. One of the things that I found in my own personal practice is that when you treat people all the same, they can deal with any rule. If the rule is you're in group 5 minutes late, we don't let you in, they can understand that. When you say the rule is that you have to do this, you have to get this done, and as long as everybody else has to do it, it's fine. But once you break that rule for one, then if you don't break it for them, now it becomes personal. Now they see it as it's not a standard rule, it's a rule that is enforced when you want to. And what happens is, in a lot of situations, that people perceive and see selective enforcement many times. They see that people could do the same crime or similar crimes, and then one person will get and one person won't. Now, does that always mean it's a racial aspect? Absolutely not. It could be doing the time of the month. Right? Certain cops have certain quotas, and when it gets to the end of the month, they're a little bit more strict than the other type of the month. There might be another reason why that's the case, but it doesn't change the perception. And the more the perception is in a skewed way in one direction, every seeing of that in reality is going to see, you see, I was absolutely right. We all have a problem with confirmation bias. So that when we look at the media, and the media reports on every crime that ever there's interracial, you're going to say, oh my God, it has to be about race. But they don't report on every crime. So what happens is you get a skewed version. That does not mean that racism isn't happening, because we know for a fact it does. It happens in people's interactions. It happens in the supermarkets. It happens when people look at other people. It happens when people will speak to other people or not. And when somebody tries to devalue them, which is the reason why I was so upset about that video with Michael Knowles and why I put such a long time to respond to it, because it devalues reality in the name of an agenda that causes people to want to lose their mind and not think about what is in the best interest. How do we get people to hear us? But it's, I don't care anymore. They say another term, but I'm going to use the I don't care anymore. I don't care about what this happens. I am so sick and tired of being looked at a certain way, being treated a certain way. As some people put it, being subhuman. And it keeps getting worse. Part of the reason why is people don't understand other people. As I explained in the Michael Knowles situation, how he twists and turns in order to be able to create his worldview. When people who are suffering and are disenfranchised hear that, they become infuriated. Viva Fry is a lawyer from Ontario, and he has a very brilliant channel where he talks about law and many cases, and he gives a great assessment many times about cases and perception and bias. And I was in utter shock by his portrayal of this incident and his assessment. It knocked me off my feet. In his assessment, he utilizes and goes out of his scope of practice and starts analyzing Miss Cooper as being somebody who has a severe anxiety disorder that debilitates her so severely. Now, as a mental health professional, we should never ever diagnose somebody from a video that's a minute and 9 seconds long. I don't know if Miss Cooper suffers with any sort of anxiety disorder. I wouldn't be able to tell you in a situation where somebody gets agitated and upset or controlling. It could look many different ways for many different situations. But because Mr. Fry has a mindset and a bias himself, he jumps to this ideology about what he knows about Amy Cooper and her psychiatric issues. Sadly, instead of pointing out this was an issue of racism, it was, no, you have to understand it from her point of view. I wonder whether or not Mr. Fry believes we need to understand it from all the African American kids and men who have been put in jail and had their lives ruined because other people didn't understand things from their point of view. Where there's been reactions or situations where people don't recognize the facts of what happens to them, and which breeds that anger. That all of a sudden, when this young woman who looks more like Mr. Fry has this type of action. Now, I can't go into Mr. Fry's head, but it might be the fact that he identifies more with her. I was very happy, finally, to hear Ben Shapiro talking about the difference between Mr. Floyd's case and the Cooper case in Central Park. And he explains that we don't know the motivation in the Floyd case. Could it have been racial? Absolutely, but we don't know. And it could have been something else. And it turns out, it sounds like they think that the person that was on his neck actually worked with him. So this could even be something personal. We just don't have enough information. The problem is that when you go into such denial about cases that are so blatant, it also becomes an issue that you don't see. And then people don't trust your judgment. As I said to begin with, I think the right should have been the first people to come out and say blatant racism. Yes, this is a case of racism. Very few people get up and say, by the way, I'm about to commit a racist act. It's a very difficult thing to find. So more often than not, you're left with a situation because you don't know what's in people's hearts about why they do what they do. Which is one of the reasons why I'm not a big fan of the hate crimes laws, because it denotes that you're going to know what's in that person's heart. So I could be just as hateful doing one action, but if I don't say anything and nobody knows, no problem. And I could do the very same act, screaming a racial slur, and now it's a hate crime. And one of my issues about this is it becomes an unfair aspect of whether or not you're making a judgment based upon motivation, and it gets very murky to know whether or not it was because of somebody's race or not, which is the reason why I think we have to keep people on an even keel in following law and keep the laws equal. We should not have different laws for different people based upon different colors of their skin. But this is what happens when we try to get into the minds of people. I don't know if Miss Cooper is a racist. I don't. And I'd never say that this person is a racist. I could say this was a racist act in dealing with a trope that she was trying to tap into to cause fear and control of a grown man. In her apology, which Mr. Fry didn't seem to either read or understand, she actually makes it worse because she doesn't take responsibility for the phone call and what her motivation is, which is the most egregious part. She takes responsibility for not leashing the dog, which of course was her problem and what she did wrong. She says afterwards, but I was so afraid. She was so afraid that she approached him, telling him what she's going to do. Because that's what you always do when you're afraid. You tell the person what you're going to do. That's not a statement of fear. That's a statement of intimidation. And the nature by Mr. Fry attempting to understand that this is because of anxiety and fear. Like I said, the law, he may know very, very well. But in terms of human behavior and the psychological responses, that's not the case. People with anxiety do the exact opposite. They run away from situations. They get away from conflict. They don't increase it and make it more. If you wanted to go ahead and go into personality disorders or who else we could have speculate, I could sit here all day and go through different disorders that somebody may have. But that would be unprofessional and really erroneous. The issue isn't here to talk about Miss Cooper. It's not to talk about Mr. Floyd. It's not to talk about the nature of any one particular issue. But we as a nation have to look at the reason why people are right now running around looting in the streets and angry. And yes, I'm well aware of the aspect that some people are paying people off to do things and all those types of things that are going on. And yes, there are people that are being opportunistic and saying, okay, let's put fanning the flames and trying to make this more so that they can do for their political agendas. And that's really sick and ill. And I hope that they'll get caught and prosecuted for that behavior. But the nature and the anger underneath is immense. Hearing Mr. Knowles, hearing Mr. Fry, and then hearing many of the people on the left in terms of their commentators, Van Jones and his explanation of the event. And I look down and I go, how in the world can people see the same event, the same video, and come to vastly different conclusions? And it's very simple. It has to do with the confirmation bias that people have in creating their worldview and coming up with excuses and reasons. The biggest problem with Ms. Cooper's apology is it didn't get to the heart of where the problem is. I don't think Ms. Cooper's life should be ruined. I don't think anybody should be making death threats against her. I don't think people should be attempting to destroy her. But I do think there needs to be an education that goes on and an ability for people to understand what is right, what is wrong, where is crossing a line, and the ability for people to make amends and to correct. I think is very big that we need to allow people to do. But in order to do that, one must first admit what they did wrong and not try to sugarcoat it. And the biggest problem I saw with the apology, which I didn't see anybody talk about, it really didn't apologize for what the real issue was. There was no fear. It was a manipulation to try to say I shouldn't be charged with a crime. It was a defensive apology. It wasn't a I did something racially wrong. It wasn't just a misunderstanding. And again, people who I respect their opinions about many things. If I ever had to be in a lawsuit, Mr. Fry seems to be a very competent attorney who I would be, somebody would say, wow, maybe I would take him. So it's not a situation where I'm disparaging his intellectual ability. But his bias in this area, and I don't know why, is incredibly clear. Because again, just like Mr. Knowles changes facts that aren't there, he creates an entire psychiatric history for this person in order to justify and rationalize why this wasn't racism. It really goes back to Chris Rock's old joke. What do you have to do to be a racist? Go around shooting Edgar Mevers? Very few people sit and tell you their racist intent when they're being racist. And this is the issue that a lot of people on the right don't seem to really understand. And I don't think it's coming out of racism or sort of malice. I think it's an aspect of not understanding. And that lack of understanding creates this illusion. While it is true that you don't see as many people being shot who are African American as people have a perception of, the perception is still there and people are still reactive of it. Even in the apology that Amy gave, she talked about how, wow, I saw the police as people that are protectors, not realizing that sometimes other people don't. Which of course wasn't the case when she did what she did. She recognized it right away. The truth is that the police should be protectors of all citizens. Black, white, Hispanic, Asian, shouldn't make a difference. The fact that that perception exists is the problem. The fact that people believe that they have a leg up because of their color of their skin or their economic status is problematic. We're supposed to be, theoretically, all equal under the law. The problem is that we know that we're not. We know that there are disparities. And that disparity causes a lot of problems in terms of people feeling disenfranchised. And if we don't solve that problem, then these things will continue. We have to be able to hear what it is, how other people feel, and their perception, and not just say, well, I'm sorry, I don't see the evidence of this. I'm just going to dismiss it outright. And when it's as clear as day, and you're missing it, you have to question, where is your bias? What is it that you're not seeing about this event when it's as clear as day? In the Michael Knowles video, I break down step by step what each behavior is showing and what's called the subtext of the language is being said. Because when you're analyzing speech, it's not only what's said, it's also the subtext. There's an underneath language that's being said. And it seems that people who, for not only not right or left only, but independents also, who don't seem to understand that the nature of this act was a racial act. And I applaud Ben Shapiro for saying it finally. I hope that he will inform or have a conversation with Mr. Knowles about this idea and the problems that he has in terms of that twist. It doesn't do anybody a service. It only hurts more people. I hope that you found this video helpful. If you disagree with anything I said, please feel free to contact me and please leave a comment below. I'll be very happy to respond. I also got a comment from somebody, think something, who left me a comment, but it had very colorful language. And again, with this, the idea of the comment I very much agreed with. The problem is that this is a family-friendly channel, and I can't allow that comment to go through because of that. So it's one of the restrictions. So if you like, you can re-comment your comment with taking out some of the more colorful language, and I'll be very happy to have it posted. And I did agree with the sentiment of your comment. I just couldn't post it based upon the channel. So if you want, please feel free to repost. And again, if you like this video, hit like. If you haven't, subscribe. And of course, if you'd like to become a patron to the site, just go to the Subcribe-star link below. And thank you. Have a good day and good mental health.